Hi everyone, so my name is Sophie, I'm the CEO and founder of Xesto, and we are a gesture recognition startup. And I want to talk to you guys about gesture recognition and really the future of where touchless interfaces are going to be going. Who here was here yesterday for that keynote? Anyone? Did you guys see that drone? That drone dance? I thought that was like the coolest thing ever, and I thought that it was live. Like the drones were responding to the gestures, and I could not have been more excited. So when I found out it wasn't, I was really sad. But I realized that we all can be the ones to really make that happen. And then that in itself really reinvigorated me. So yeah, just to reintroduce myself, I guess, the third time. My name is Sophie. I'm the CEO and founder of Xesto. Here are my social links. And the reason why I'm here talking about this is because I'm spending my life really just trying to push forward science fiction and making it reality. I think that gesture recognition is the next frontier. Voice recognition is here to stay, and it's only natural that gestures are next. So to talk about the future, what we have to do is kind of go back a little bit and talk about the past. So this was one of the first iterations of an actual mobile phone. Not the smartphones that we see now, and I'm sure some people have even had one of these. I don't know if anyone, yes, you've had one? Yeah, I didn't, but lucky you. Lucky all of you. Exactly, it was a brick. But this was really exciting because back then you could actually leave the house and have somebody contact you on your phone and call you and talk to you. But then it turned into this. It got smaller, you could put them in your pocket, and it was really exciting because they had that dramatic effect of slapping it closed and flipping it open. So the flip phone was quite cool and quite fun, and what was interesting about it is companies started realizing that people didn't just want them for calling each other. People wanted it to communicate with each other on a different medium through text. So text messages became more and more popular. Right now I'm finding that I don't really talk to people that much on the phone anymore. It's mainly just texting. So then mid-2000s, who here is Canadian by any? No one. One person. Anyone else? Well, I'm Canadian, yeah, so we're Canadian. And BlackBerry was one of our biggest success stories once upon a time. And they really changed the way that we also interact with technology. This really revolutionized the smartphone era. And on this, what we had was email, the internet, really fun games like Brick. But what we see here that's consistent with the other two phones that we've seen is the way that you interact with this is through buttons. And this is through the keyboard. When this guy came around, there was a lot of hesitation towards picking up an iPhone and a touchscreen because everybody was so set on the buttons and the keyboards. I remember, even my mom 2 years ago was like, I want the buttons, I'm not getting an iPhone. What they considered was that with a keyboard, it was more natural, it was easier to use. Everybody knew that as a familiar interface. Your laptop has a keyboard even now, but with the BlackBerry, it was the way that you interacted with technology. And what people didn't really realize at the time was we would be compensating for that with autocorrect and it's the software. It was moving away from the hardware and towards the software. So things really changed, and software got better and better, and by 2011, the demand for the iPhone surpassed the demand for the BlackBerry, and there went Canada's biggest export. But nowadays, what we see here is there's less buttons on smartphones. So what we're seeing here is, as of the last year and a bit, companies are saying we don't need the home button anymore. And now we're really just relying on touch gestures and voice control. So the way that we're interacting with even smartphones has changed drastically in the last year, and we can only imagine what's going to come. So consumer electronics really influence other spaces as well, particularly the auto space. I'm going to also go back a little bit with the auto space. You can see here in 2008, buttons were essentially the only control inputs for interacting with your car. So honestly, there are so many buttons on cars from like the mid-2000s where I've never even touched them. Like, I don't even know what they do. But then they started taking them away and like replacing them with touch screens. And that was really nice. It was more of a fluid user experience. And of course, a lot of research is done in this because of like, you know, there's so many safety regulations with car interfaces that have to be taken into consideration. And yeah, in 2017, like, this is what we're considering the future of cars to look like. No buttons whatsoever, and it'll be gesture controlled. Like, these aren't even meant to be touchscreens. This is gonna be voice and gesture controlled. And this is the Byton concept car. And yeah, so they really believe that the UI and UX of cars and car dashboards it's gonna be so different and not even in like so many years. This will be relatively soon. So my thesis up until now, essentially, is that buttons really are going obsolete. Technology, for so long, we needed buttons as input mechanisms, but now like the software has gotten so good that these input mechanisms are like no longer needed. And this is happening with other industries as well. So this is a McDonald's touchscreen. You can now go into McDonald's or into other fast food shops or other food industry places and order food and pick up food without actually talking to anyone or pressing any buttons for effect. And that's also the same with being at home. Like you can just interact with it and order Uber Eats without talking to anyone. Like this whole industry is getting changed so quickly with technology. So another public space where touchscreens have really been adopted, or at least like alternate user interfaces have been adopted, is in the navigation space. So this is in a mall, but also in airports, public terminals. Touchscreens are really, really going into play. And in healthcare as well. And with these three use cases, these are three relatively old industries, where you will think that like people shouldn't be touching public terminals in all of these places. Like it's kind of gross, right? Like in a hospital to be going in, I've seen so many public terminals in hospitals and I'm like, I don't want to touch that in a hospital. Everybody here is sick. And that's the same in fast food joints. Like you don't want to be touching those. So the question is, at this conference, like, what about the new industries? What about the user interfaces and the mechanisms for interaction in new industries like VR, AR, and XR? When VR was coming out, like, this is what we were looking at. Like, we're introducing these exciting new technologies to the masses, but we're giving them old technology. And for so many people that like I was not a gamer growing up, so whenever I go into a headset and I have a game control, it's very unnatural for me. And it also gives you those like stiff dino hands. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Like, you always have these floating hands that like look like little ghost hands, and you just have no dexterity, and it's very unnatural. So we really need to change this, and we really have to start challenging the status quo. Just because these technologies existed beforehand doesn't mean that that's what we need now. So for us to get to this point where we're really just interacting with our hands, with robots and VR and doing all these really cool things, we have to start taking the technologies that we have right now and building to what we can build. So this just came out recently. I know it's not here in the United States yet. But they have hand tracking. They're going to be able to support gesture control, as well as the Lenovo Mirage. Like, we're able to take these technologies and build really interesting and cool applications for people that they are now going to take as the new experiences and take it forward. So one of the reasons why I think gesture control is so integral to technology moving forward is like body language is so universal just across humanity. Like, you can look at somebody and you understand how they're feeling. You can understand whether or not you should go and talk to them. there's a lot that you can take out of body language, and if you don't have that as an input mechanism for technology, like, there is so much that is lost there. Again, with gestures, there's so much immersion with minimum learning, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to go and relearn how to interact with a computer if you already know what some basic gestures are from touch screens. Like, we're able to take 2D gestures and put them into 3D. And then gestures, I think, are honestly the most natural user interface. There aren't really more natural user interfaces than what you already do when, like I mentioned, with people. So what we're able to do is, for people that aren't necessarily people that don't have computer literacy, they're able to go in and interact relatively quickly. And who's paying attention to this? This is often a question that I get, because I'm in this space, but people are like, this is a moonshot, like, this is so far away, and I thoroughly do disagree with all of these people. Firstly, science fiction disagrees. Whenever I talk about what I'm up to every day, people are like, oh, yes, I know, like Minority Report, like Iron Man, all these things. And it's like, yes, just like that. But the numbers are also not lying. This is the touchless gesture market size, not just the gesture market size. The gesture recognition for both touch-based and touchless is, by 2022, projected to be about 19 billion. But by 2022, the touchless gesture-based market is going to be about $9 billion, and that's one of the highest industry growth projections of about 30% annual growth rate between now and then, which is incredibly substantial, right, for a transformative technology. That people are not paying attention to this, it boggles my mind. And the market segments, this was in 2016, and it's not so drastically different now. But it's predominantly the consumer electronics that are investing in this space and that are adopting this kind of technology. Then it's the auto industry, and I think that number it'll go up a little bit this year because there's really a push for this kind of technology in the auto space. Then I mentioned that. Advertisement and communication, just like we saw earlier with in public terminals, that's going to be huge, right? Like, you can go to a mall and interact with something without touching it. Like I said, like, it's gross to be touching screens. So it's a new way to really interact with people. And then in geographies, it's interesting. Asia's actually investing the most and adopting this the most. You would think that it would be North America, so we have to catch up, and everyone in this room, pay attention. Then it's us, and then it is Europe, and then the rest of the world. And these are some big companies that are investing in it. Like, this is not something that's going to be going away. So the question is, what is next? What we have to do as content creators, as developers, as people investing in the space, being active, evangelizing it, we need to start combining different platforms because these should not be used independently. So you can use gesture recognition and voice recognition together to understand context better, to make a more user-centric experience, which is much more natural for people. And by doing that, also increased exposure really increases adoption. Because this isn't necessarily like the most intuitive concept, it's very much like a science fiction, people know it as science fiction, but the more you show it to them and the more that you expose people, the more they're willing to and excited to adopt it. Like, this is an exciting thing, and people just want to see that that works, it's trustworthy, and that it will happen across the industries. So yeah, it's time to change interaction. Any questions? Yes?
So if I can train my own gestures with machine learning, what does your company do? What are you doing in this space?
So we are a machine learning platform for developers, content creators, to go and train gestures. You put in 10 examples, and we train a machine learning model for you to put into your application. And you can take that across different hardware, so we want to be device agnostic. So you just do it one time, and then it's one and done.
Do you foresee something like, just like I can change fonts, could I download a library of gestures?
Yes.
can the gestures be congruent with augmented objects in the world? Like if I want to squeeze something, and the squeeze gesture, say I want to make the squeeze gesture only work if I'm actually squeezing at the location where the object is.
Yeah, that's just localizing it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's quite easy. Yep.
Do you think there is a need for some sort of a universal language for gesture assignments to various functions? So there are agreed upon languages and rules in visual languages, but in terms of gestures, we haven't seen that yet. So do you think that there should be a language that governs assignments and use of gestures?
So I think that there should be, but what I'm really excited to see when this is picked up is how things are being used and by who, like across demographics and across industries. So I don't necessarily know if certain gestures are going to work in a factory setting, if they would work also for a consumer product. So I think that that's something that needs to be really studied. Because if you're wearing gloves, like you might want to do the same gesture, but you might be limited and constrained to a certain set, or a certain limitation of like what you really can do. But I think that we are going to come to a convergence of really what is the most intuitive and what will be that standard set.
Which one do you think is more difficult, hand tracking or gesture?
Hand tracking, because we're doing both. So yeah, I'm speaking from experience. Hand tracking sucks. Yeah.
With gesture recognition, how close are we to getting real-time sign language understanding?
I think I know of a startup that's doing that with wearables. Oh, yeah, so the question was, with gesture recognition, how close are we to doing real-time hand tracking? Oh, no, not hand tracking, sign language translation. I think it would all depend on like the context. So if this is done in a relatively, if it's done in a place where like there are the appropriate sensors, then I think that it would be something that is not so far off. But if it's in like a 2D video setting, it might be.
You keep saying it's not too far off. Meanwhile, there's a whole segment of handicapped people who can't interact.
Yeah.
That seems like one of the simplest things to solve.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's your first font library right there.
Yeah.